All right, so in this second portion, we're going to continue looking at properties of exponents, and we're going to focus on negative exponents. So negative exponents would be like if we have something like this, 5 to the negative second power. So when you have a negative exponent, your goal is usually to make it positive. At least, especially for now, starting off, we'll say that as our goal. If you see negative exponent, we're trying to make it positive. So how do we make it positive? Well, it turns out if you have a, how should we say this? So let's say this. So when you have something with a negative exponent, if it's not a fraction already, or if it's not in a fraction, turn it into a fraction. If you don't know this, you can make anything into a fraction just by putting it over 1. It doesn't change it. It's just adding in a 1 that's technically there. So negative exponent, think of it in terms of a fraction. It turns out when you have something, when you have a number and it passes from top to bottom or bottom to top on a fraction, the sign of the exponent changes. So if we have a negative exponent and we want to change that sign to make it positive, we need to move it over the fraction line. So this 5 to the negative second is now going to be on the bottom, and it's going to be positive, the exponent. And it's just next to this 1 now. They're being multiplied. And 1 times anything is just itself. Also, since there's nothing left up top, we're going to put a 1. If you ever move something and there's nothing left there, put a 1. And so it turns out in this case, we really don't need this 1 on the bottom because it's not changing anything. So we just get 1 over 5 squared. And we really went step by step with that, but you don't need to include all those steps when you do it yourself. So 1 over 5 squared is our answer. You could keep simplifying from there. You could do 5 squared, which is 5 times 5. But for now, we'll just focus on making them positive. So let's take another one. Let's say we have 1 over 3 to the negative 4th power. Our goal is to make this negative exponent positive. We know that to change the sign of the exponent, we need to move this whole thing across the fraction line. So if it's on top, it needs to move to the bottom. If it's on bottom, it needs to move to the top. In this case, this one's starting on the bottom, so it needs to go up top. So that 1 up top is just going to be multiplied to this, which won't change it. So this will just go to the top, 3 to the positive 4th. And on bottom, there's nothing left. We move this, so we just put a 1. And anything over 1 is just itself. So we could even just write this as 3 to the 4th. Careful, we can't do that over here. It's only when the 1's on bottom. If the 1's on top, you can't just get rid of it. So we're kind of explaining a lot of little details. Let's maybe do 1 or 2 more just so you can, get the hang of it. Let's look at these 2. So we see we have a negative exponent. We know we want to think of it in being in a fraction. And this first one's already in a fraction. So that's helpful. We need to move this whole thing across the fraction bar to change the sign of the exponent. So this is now going to be on top. That 1 doesn't really need to be there because it's going to be 2 to the 3rd power times 1. And anything times 1 is itself. So we can just leave that aside. And there's nothing left on the bottom. We move that. So if there's nothing left, again, we put a 1. And we know that anything over 1 is itself. So 2 to the 3rd power. Over here, this second one, we see negative exponent. We know we want to think about negative exponents with fractions. This one's not a fraction already, so we'll put it over 1. That's not changing it. It's just writing in the 1 that's implied. So same thing here. We want to make it positive, so it needs to move across the fraction line. So now it's going to be on bottom. The exponent's going to be positive. That 1 doesn't need to be there. And there's nothing left up top, so we have to put a 1 in its place. So let's go ahead, take a moment and do a practice. We'll try 2 here. Let's see. So go ahead, pause the video here, and try these out. All right, let's have a look at these together. So we see negative exponent. We want to think of it in terms of a fraction. This first one is not a fraction, so we have to put it over 1. To change the sign of the exponent, we have to move it across the fraction line. This is going to become 3 to the positive 10th on bottom. And on top, there's nothing left, so we just put a 1. Second one, this one's already a fraction. We need to change the sign of this exponent, so move it over the fraction line. 5 to the positive, 3 is on top, there's nothing left on bottom, so put a 1. Anything over 1 is itself. So we just have 5 to the 3rd power here. So that's that. Let's just do one more small thing, which will be just having multiple, just adding in some more complexity. So let's say we have 4 to the 2nd power, 4 to the negative 2nd over 8 to the negative 3rd. Let's say we have 9 to the negative 4th over 2 to the 3rd. So this first one should be nice and easy, because in this case, they both need to move. So this one's going to need to move down to become positive. This one's going to need to move up. So what do you think this answer is going to be? 8 to the positive 3 over 4 to the positive 2. This one moved to the top when the exponent became positive 3. This one moved to the bottom. Exponent became positive 2. The second one here is a little bit trickier. What's going to happen here? So in this one, only one of them needs to move. If you move this 2 to the 3rd up to the top, then it's going to become 2 to the negative 3 up here, which is the opposite of what we want to do. So 2 to the 3rd stays where it is on the bottom. But we know that this 9 to the negative 4th needs to move. So it's coming down to the bottom. And now it's going to become 9 to the positive 4th. I mentioned this briefly earlier. Now that we have 2 things on the bottom, they're just being multiplied. There's nothing left up top, so we put a 1. And this would be our answer. Let's look at one more like that. Let's say I love this one. 7 to the first power over 10 to the negative fifth. 7 to the first can stay where it is because that's already positive. But this one we need to move over the fraction line to change the sign. We have 7 to the first up top. And now this 10 to the fifth is going to be up top also. And they're not just squished up next to each other because they're both numbers. You can do that when you have a number and a variable. But if you just have numbers, you want to make sure to put in the multiplication symbol. Or you could put them both in parentheses to show they're being multiplied. And then there's nothing left on bottom, so we just put a 1. But again, like before, if you have a 1 on bottom, you can just take it away. Anything over 1 is just itself. So we have 10 to the fifth times 7 to the first. So let's try one last practice before we move on to the second part of the classwork. So go ahead and pause the video and try this one out. 3 to the negative 8th power over 5 squared. All right, let's have a look. So here we have 5 to the positive 2. That can stay where it is. It's already positive. This one's going to need to move to change the sign. So 5 squared is still on bottom. And now we have 3 to the 8th down here. Again, when you just have numbers, you don't want to just leave them next to each other like this. You want to make sure to write in the multiplication symbol. And there's nothing left up top, so we just put a 1. And can we just take that 1 away in this case? Can this just become 3 to the 8th times 5 squared? What do you think? We cannot. That's only when the 1 is on bottom. Here, you want to leave it like this. So that's it for this. Let's go ahead and move on to part B of the classwork.